Hello, welcome back. Today, what we're going to talk about is a very sacred ceremony called a shaker ceremony. I'm talking about this ceremony with the permission of the person who participated in the ceremony and also with the permission of my elder, the person that I call the old man affectionately. So, in this lifetime, we struggle a lot, and we often wonder where those struggles come from. The explanation today is going to point out a place where those struggles come from. The reason that we're talking about this in the class is I think it's very, very important that you understand that there is different ways of living people's lives. And this is one of the important aspects of traditional Native people that I believe needs to be talked about. This shaker ceremony is a very ancient ceremony. It's a very special ceremony to my heart. It's one of the ceremonies that the old man invited me into and also wanted me for years and years to perform after he's gone. The old man's gone now, and I have yet to do one of these on my own. But what I do want to do is to tell you a little bit about it. So, what the things that I say today are not going to be the intricacies of the ceremony. They're going to be an overview and kind of present the ceremony in a nutshell. So, we're going to start with this person that I'll call Joe. Joe was really, really suffering in his life. He'd lost his kids, he'd lost his wife, he'd lost his extended family. He was sort of ostracized by a number of people around him because Joe did some very, very silly things. Joe was an addict, unfortunately, and it was very, very difficult for him to escape those that addiction and those addictions that seemed to come with where he was in his life. Joe drank so much that the physiological perspectives in his body were really messed up. So Joe could hardly walk at this point in time. Joe could hardly speak at this point in time. He didn't remember much. In other words, his short-term memory was very, very bad. He also was suffering from a form of dementia where he couldn't stand up for any period of time. Also, his liver was in very, very bad shape, and he was right in the process of getting dialysis for his kidneys. So Joe wasn't doing well. So in this ceremony, then the ceremony started with Joe laying in his bed one day and crying literally from sunup till sundown. When the sun finally set in the sky, Joe closed his eyes and managed to get some sleep. While he was sleeping is when a vision came to him. So in that vision, Joe said that a hand came from the sky and lifted him up. He said that hand was very, very warm. And he said that hand was very, very gentle in the way that it handled him. And that hand lifted him up. And then from somewhere out in the darkness, something told Joe that he had to do something and do it now or he would be dead in a week. So Joe then contacted one of the local elders up there, and one of the local elders up there in northern Minnesota contacted the old man. The old man went and talked to Joe and spent some time with him. In fact, it was the very next day. The old man made a conclusion that Joe would be able to go into this ceremony, this shaker ceremony. Very, very sacred ceremony. And within the confines of that ceremony, the old man said that we may be able to help you, Joe, in finding a way out of this mess and going through this healing in that very, very sacred ceremony. So the old man then contacted me, and then I went up north. And while I was up north, I had to gather the people that would be needed for this ceremony. I needed a very reliable firekeeper. I needed a very reliable set of people to put in the directions of the lodge. So I got those people together, and we came to a date. And the date, of course, had to be within that week period because of what that vision had told Joe. So we immediately set everything up. We went up and we tore down the old sweat lodge and we built a new sweat lodge. We went out and we bought new coverings for the sweat lodge because this ceremony really requires that everything be fresh. I began boiling the cedar water very, very early in the morning to get it to a concentrate by the time the ceremony came. So, so that process was set into motion. And then the firekeeper began to build the sacred fire. So he and I together built the sacred fire, and we put tobacco on top of the ledge on top of this where the rocks were going to go, and the tobacco was put in the formation of a particular group of stars in the sky. Then we brought the rocks over. We made 13 rocks per door, 4 doors, so there was a total of 52 rocks in the ceremony. We brought the first 13 rocks over, and we put them on the shelf of the sacred fire in the shape of a turtle. 5 down the middle, with the first 4 getting tobacco put on them, and then 4 on each side, which formulated that sacred shell. And then all of the other rocks got put on top of that sacred shell, and it was just like the creation story with Mother Earth, where the muskrat put the mud on top of the turtle, and then the land began to expand. So that's what we're emulating here. So the fire was built. We had lots of kindling on there, lots of good solid birch bark. We lit the fire. First match, the fire went. That's a good sign. And so the fire began to heat the rocks. At that point in time, we went in and prepared the internal aspects of the sweat lodge. We hung the eagle feathers in all 4 directions, and we got the copper buckets, copper ladles. Everything was in order by the time Joe arrived at the sweat lodge. When Joe arrived at the sweat lodge, a number of us went over and helped Joe sit down by the old man, and myself, the old man, and 2 other people sat, and we started to talk with Joe and ask Joe various questions, and we found out some things. We found out that, number 1, Joe spoke no Ojibwe. He did not speak the native language at all. Another thing that we found out was that day he had a very, very bad spell, and they were going to take him to the hospital for heart palpitations, but at that point in time, his body corrected himself, and then he insisted on coming to the sweat lodge ceremony. We asked Joe if it was the fear of the sweat lodge ceremony that may have caused this, and he said that he didn't think so. The old man heard this and decided that we would go forward with the ceremony. We asked Joe a number of other questions about his hopes, his dreams, and the biggest question of all is we asked Joe if he believed that this ceremony would work, and Joe said yes. So we knew at that point in time that good things were going to happen. So we helped Joe to his feet and prepared to take him into the sweat lodge ceremony. We did. We put Joe in the north door. The north door is that healing door in our way of thinking. So that north door then is where Joe sat. 13 rocks were brought in. The water was brought in. The medicines were put on the rocks. The ceremony began. The old man did a very, very, very lengthy invocation and sang a number of songs. And then what he did is he just sat back and used his hand drum and controlled sort of the tempo of the lodge by regulating all of our hearts to that drum. In other words, when you're doing that drum, when you're using that drum in the sweat lodge, you can actually sustain that steady heartbeat for everybody. So the heartbeat everybody has to be on the same wavelength in that heartbeat, because we're going to need the power of everybody in there as one. So the sacred circle was formed, and the ceremony began, and the first door went through, and we all prayed for Joe. The door was then opened, and another set of 13 very, very hot rocks were brought in. So already we have 26 rocks in the sweat lodge ceremony. Already it's very, very, very warm in there. The door was shut. The old man repeated the process, only this time he repeated the process for the second door. So he did the second door prayers, he did the second door invocation, and he did 4 songs. So I want to point something out here. When we do funerals, we have certain songs that are sung on 4 days as the soul goes through the Milky Way to the clouds onto the spirit world. when we're doing this ceremony, we do those songs backwards. We do those songs backwards to bring the soul to the surface. So during the ceremony, that's what the old man was doing. I didn't realize it at the time until after the ceremony when he actually pointed out why we did that. So the second door was completed. Then came the third door. This is the door where everything was going to happen. We knew this was going to be a very, very long door. The old man passed a ladle of water around to everybody, and the door began. The flap was closed. The old man did another very, very, very lengthy invocation, and he sang the 4 songs, and the ceremony began. So in that ceremony then, as you can see back here, if this was the sweat lodge, Joel would be laying across in front of the old man here. And I was over on the other side of the door. When the old man did a certain series of prayers, one of the things that happened in the sweat lodge is that everything got very, very orange in the sweat lodge. And everybody saw the same thing. After the orange subsided, we saw yellow come up seemingly from Joe and hover over Joe's body. So at that point in time, what happened was the old man lifted the soul out of Joe's body and began to talk to that soul. So what that soul is doing at this point in time is it went back to the person that soul previously occupied, who had passed away a number of years ago. So what's going on here is the old man is going to lift that soul, bring it back in time, and talk to it. And what he's going to do is try to find out where whatever went wrong in that soul went wrong. So, in other words, what's going to happen is the old man is going to correct the issue that happened, where it happened in the lifetime of that soul, which is an eternity. So, our belief then is that there are incarnate souls. Not all souls are incarnate, and some souls will never incarnate. But an incarnate soul then will get passed on from generation to generation to generation to generation. And with that soul comes all the baggage of the person that soul occupied, both good and bad. And it's the belief of our elders and the old man that with the bad stuff, there may have been things that hung around and may have been things that have been activated in Joe. So ultimately, Joe wound up with a ceremony that went back a long way, and during the process of Joe's life, some of the bad elements, the bad baggage that was brought with that soul was triggered, and Joe's life sort of spun out of control. So what the old man is going to do is go back in time, fix it where it happened, bring it forward, put it back in Joe so Joe can live a good life. And that's precisely what happened. So remember that Joe could speak none of his native language. So that was an issue at the beginning, because the old man has to do his ceremonies in Ojibwe, and Joe couldn't speak Ojibwe, so there was translation that had to happen. During the process of that translation, though, we managed to hear a lot of things. We know that in this life here, this first stop back for Joe's soul, what we learned there was that Joe seemingly lived a fairly good life in that other person's body. So Joe's soul lived a good life, and the old man determined that nothing happened at that level. So what the old man did is he dropped that yellow back in, and he raised the yellow out again, and this time the soul was in this person's, came from this person's body. So first time here, second time here. And the old man began to speak, and something miraculous happened. From Joe was very, very, very good Ojibwe. It was sort of broken in some spots, but Joe was speaking Ojibwe. Now remember, Joe doesn't know how to speak Ojibwe. So where did that come from? Joe was describing places that did not exist anymore and didn't exist way before Joe was born. So Joe was seeing the world through the eyes of whoever his soul occupied at that particular point in time. The old man went through the process and determined that nothing happened there, so the soul went back down, and then we went back another generation. And that's where the old man found what may have happened. And what happened then was, in that generation, some very, very bad things happened at the boarding schools. And those things manifested and attached itself, and the soul brought those things forward, life upon life. I want to point out that when the soul came here, nothing must have triggered it. When the soul was here, nothing must have triggered it. But when the soul got over to Joe, something in Joe's life triggered some of the bad things that that soul carried, and it began to manifest in Joe's life. So at that point in time, Joe was born, represented by this child over here, and lived a good portion of his life, the first 27 years of his life, without any issues, and then something happened. Something happened that triggered that soul and some of the baggage that came with that soul. So that had to be fixed. The old man went through a very lengthy hour upon hour ceremony within that sweat lodge. So it was a ceremony within a ceremony to cleanse that soul. Brought it back, put it back here, cleansed, took it out, brought it back, put it here, cleansed, and then dropped it back into Joel. And when Joel came out of that ceremony that night, Joel could walk, Joel could talk, and something more interesting is that Joel was speaking broken Ojibwe. So at that point in time, that ceremony seemed to activate something in Joe that brought forth Ojibwe. So also, he knew some of the elements of some of the sacred ceremonies that he could have only learned back here, probably. So there was a lot that reattached itself and began to manifest in Joe after that. I will say this, that Joe never had an issue with alcohol or drugs again. He got back with his family, and he now holds a fairly substantial position in the lodge that he belongs to. So Joe is but a small example of traditional native cultures. Now again, this isn't a ceremony that's done everywhere. There are variations of this kind of a ceremony, and there are different ways that the ceremonies are done. That's up to elders out there, and that's their business. And what I'm sharing with you is a very, very narrow perspective of a very traditional way of life, in the life that I have been introduced to. So this does not represent all Native people. I'll repeat that. This does not represent all Native people. But we like to talk about this stuff from time to time, especially in a class where we're trying to educate people about Native people, just to show them that there are different ways of life that are different from your own. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.